continue our course on Indian knowledge systems with our fourth speaker this semester. He is Dr. Raghavasimhan Thirunarayanan, who is with us as a scholar in residence for research on ancient Indian mathematics. But since he has many strings to his bow, he will today take a very different kind of topic and show us how certain traditions of storytelling in India, and in particular certain specific stories, have migrated, mutated, adapted, and influenced various other cultures elsewhere in the world. So Raghavan, as we call him.
So today's topic is about how stories from India, mainly of Sanskrit origin, have influenced the ideas and moral philosophies of various cultures all over the world. So let's start with a picture. What do you see here? Okay, so it is called the monkey pulling the wedge, because so the Panchatantra, it says this, that there was a carpenter who had cut a block of wood into two, and he had kept a wedge to hold it in place such that it doesn't slam shut again. The monkey, because there was a band of monkeys which were coming to that place, and they were curious, and one monkey was really curious, and he wanted to see what it was, so he sat on the piece of wood and he tried removing the wedge, and the wedge slammed shut on his legs and he eventually died. So there is this fantastic translation made by Edgerton, who was one of the, and Hertel, they were two great scholars of Panchatantra who translated Panchatantra into English in 19th century and 20th century. And he says, when a man wants to meddle in affairs that do not concern him, he will be surely struck down dead like the monkey who pulled down the wedge. Okay, this is in India, and the point is, the Panchatantra just gives this statement, and then the question arises out of it, like how did it happen? So then they proceed to elaborate on it. This is in India. It's in the Patadakal temple. This is what happened in. This is how it was translated into Egypt. in Egypt, and mostly in the Islamic world, starting from Persian, the name of the story was no longer Panchatantra. It was Kalila wa Dimna. Why, I'll let you know. In the Arabic world or the Islamic world, the story is a bit more grim, that the monkey comes and sits down with his testicles hanging in the gap, and he removes the wedge and he gets caught and his testicle gets squished, and then the carpenter comes and beheads the monkey. Then this didn't stop here. This went all over the world. You know, the famous German Protestant reformer, Martin Luther, he wrote a book of collection of fables called the Aesop of Luther. It didn't concern much of the Aesop fables. It was mostly taken from Panchatantra, and he called it Monkey Business. The title of the talk was the title of the story was Monkey Business. The way he describes the monkey was for him the people who decry the epiphany and became idolaters. So they started worshipping idols. So how this simple idea of don't meddle with somebody else's affair became translated into the Christian tradition of Luther as somebody who became idolaters and started worshipping idols, because he was a Protestant reformer. He was very much against the Catholic idea of worshipping saints and the idols of the saints and everything. So he was using this as an example of his commentary on Psalm 101, and he uses this as people who became idolaters and they got struck down by the vengeance of God or something. And the one on the right is from Spanish, where the story translates to the monkey who was playing with the wedge. It became from the monkey who pulled the wedge to monkey who was. So here the monkey is trying to imitate the carpenter by taking a piece of log, and he is trying to split it into half himself. And then because he doesn't know how to use the wedge, it slams shut on him and he dies. So the idea keeps changing from one place to the other. So this is a quote from Franklin Edgerton. He says, "No other work of Hindu literature has played so important a part in the literature of the world as a Sanskrit story collection called the Panchatantra. Indeed, the statement has been made that no book except the Bible has enjoyed such an extensive circulation in the world as a whole. This might be an exaggeration, yet it's easier to underestimate than to overestimate the spread of the Panchatantra. Only in the recent times, we have all the Vedas, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita have been translated into various languages of the world. But before, say 100 years before, the most popular Indian text in the world was the Panchatantra in all its different recensions translated in different languages. The Panchatantra was already famous in India because it had been translated a million times in India in various vernacular languages. It's funny how it spread through. There is a fascinating history of how it spread through the world, but it starts from the 5th century on. The spread starts, but before that, the Panchatantra it seems to have just stayed in India. Even so, it becomes hard for us to pinpoint when exactly was the Panchatantra composed. You can have the upper ceiling is 6th century, where it was first translated into Persian, but before that it becomes hard because it's also a collection of fables. Maybe it was written over time, maybe it was composed by one author. We have no idea, and there are so many recensions, one from Kashmir, one from South India. So the practice of telling stories via animal fables, it dates back to the Vedas. In Chandogya Upanishad, there is an episode where a bunch of geese are passing over the house of a person called Janashruti, and one of the goose in the flock, he asks the first one. The first one is called Balaksha, short-sighted. He says, Balaksha, tell the glory of Janashruti, the grandson of Janashruti, is spreading wide as heaven, so don't mess with him. Don't even trouble him. So this idea of using animals to tell, where animals are anthropomorphized, and they are used to convey morals, meanings, ideas, is not new to India. It has been there since the Vedas and the Upanishads. Panchatantra is basically Niti Shastra because it gives you, among various Nitis like Chanakya Niti, Shukra Niti, Panchatantra is a Niti Shastra where it gives you various morals on how to conduct your life. But it also is not Artha Shastra because it also gives you ideas of how to govern. Because basically there are a lot of animal tales between with the king of the jungle, the lion, and the interaction with the lion, with the ministers, the jackals, and so on. So it is also, as it states, it is intended for instruction in wise human conduct, practical wisdom, or statecraft based on a pragmatic philosophy of life. It's not abstract. It's a book of, if you think it's a book of morals, it's a book of morals. If you think it's a book of simple statecraft, it is. It takes on whichever form you want it to take. So what was Panchatantra? I'll just give you brief slides. I'm not going to go into details because everybody has read about it or probably can read about it online. Just a few things. Apparently, there was a king called Amara Shakti of Mahilaropa, a kingdom called Mahilaropa. He was a very, very good ruler. He was a ruler who was just, but all three of his sons were, he considered them as fools. He didn't know, he thought that they didn't know how to govern and they will destroy his kingdom. So he got worried and he called a wise man called Vishnu Sarman, who was about 80 years old in the stories, to teach his sons how to be a ruler. So this is the Vishnu Sarman promises that he will train his sons basically with the help in whichever way, and then he conjures the idea of using stories because it makes it more interesting for his children, for the children of the king. So this part forms the Kathamukha, which is the face of the story, from which everything else is set. So it goes and it branches off into many ideas. So the 5 topics of Panchatantra are Mitra Bheda, which is the separation of friends, Mitra Labha or Mitra Samprapti, where it's called gaining of friends. It's basically how even weak people, when they band together, they can accomplish great tasks. Then you have the Kako Ulukiyam, which is crows and owls, because the owls are active at night, the crows are active during the day, crows are a bit smarter, things which come from that. Labdha Prashnam, which is the loss of gains, and Aparikshitakaram, which is acting without thinking. The Panchatantra is like, it's like a box within a box. Like there is one story, and that story will give rise to another group of stories. Each will give rise to their own group in turn. In Rajasthan, there is this idea called Kavad. Yeah, so it's like box within a box within a box. So each will give rise to many stories. So this is an unbroken tradition from ever since the day of the Vedas till now, where each story will give rise to its own story, and then various morals are expounded through that. So it's like a character in the story will tell a story. Again, it's like Vikram or Betal Pachisi, the same idea. So the Vetal tells so many stories, and even within the story, there will be sub-stories, and it's a fascinating aspect of boxing everything. That's why it's also it came to be Kavad, because Kavad means basically a door. Kapata is a door. Kapata is a door in Sanskrit. So it means opening a door, and inside the door, you will have many small stories. Within that, you open another door. So let's see how Panchatantra spread worldwide. The first Western translation was by a Persian doctor called Burzai, and he was during the king of during the reign. He was the doctor, official doctor of the Sassanid king Anushiravan, whose the version of that which was written in Pahlavi, which was the old Persian, which is now lost, or Middle Persian. Pahlavi is Middle Persian, which is now lost. Apparently, he wanted to go to India to find a mystical herb, which when you sprinkle over a corpse, the corpse comes back to life. It's like the Sanjivani herb of Ramayana. So there are 2 translations of what he heard, because he couldn't find the herb anywhere. So apparently a sage told him that the high mountains were the wise men of lofty intellect, the trees were their writings, trees and the herbs were the writings, and the wisdom extracted from the writings are the elixir of life that revived the dead intelligence and buried the thought of the ignorant and unlearned. But there is another school which says the herb is the scientist, the science is the mountain, and you can never reach the mountain, top of the mountain. So the corpse is the man without the knowledge, and because an unintelligent or uneducated man everywhere is lifeless. So through the knowledge, the man becomes man comes back to life so that he can scale the mountain. So in the end, the point is he never found a magical herb. What he was left with is the bunch of stories that he got to translate. And he was quite happy with that. He didn't complain. He translated, and from which the whole world got to know, or whole Western world, because the spread of Panchatantra to the east was already taking place because of the close contacts between India and say Indonesia. The Tamil version of Panchatantra went to Indonesia. The Kashmiri recension went to Tibetan. From Tibetan, it went to China and Japan, and also it also went to Indochina, Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, and so on. So the Pahlavi version was called Kalila Go Demnag simply because the Karataka and Damanaka were the name of the two jackals in the first story of Panchatantra. One was the victorious, and the other was now the one with the horrible howl. Because the Panchatantra gave names which suited the characters. They had names called Madonmatta, which is the name of the lion. Yeah. So they gave the names which, if you translate in Sanskrit to your vernacular, you will find that the name suited the character, how the character behaved. The Persians, they didn't have an equivalent. So they just took the first two characters that they saw, Karataka and Damanaka, and he just simply translated into his local tongue, which became Kalilag or Damnag. And the Arabs took it, and then it was translated into Arabic as Kalila wa Dimna, where it became the standard name of the story. It's no longer called Panchatantra, no longer refers the name of the characters, they no longer refer to the behavior of the characters, they just are names. So it takes away a bit of the charm, because if you can guess how the character will behave by just reading the name. Now it's like you have to read the story actually. So in a way, it helped that you're forced to read the story, but it also took away the charm that the character behaves as their name. So the Arabic was translated into Syriac in the 10th or 11th century, and in the Greek in the 11th century. The Syriac version, they replaced the Brahman called Vishnu Sarman of the original Panchatantra with a guy with some character called Bidpai. Bidpai, maybe they got the name from Vidyapati, because the V and B are very similar. We actually don't know. What's funny is then it went to then it went to Arabia, where it was translated by Ibn al-Mukafa. He was the first one to translate the Pahlavi version to Arabic, and this was considered one of the greatest achievements of the Arabic translation ever. But the funny part is, even when the Arabs became Muslims, Ibn al-Mukafa was a convert from Zoroastrianism. He was a Parsi. Unfortunately, that you can ask why, because his original name was Rusbi. Rusbi, he converted to Islam and he changed his name. But the Arabs, they preferred the art over religion. They didn't have any problems. But due to afterwards, this poor guy was stoned to death because he was convicted of heresy. Then this was, how did it go to Europe? One way it went to Europe was due to the Islamic conquest of Spain. The Caliphate of Andalusia, Al-Andalus, this Arabic manuscript was introduced there, and then the Jews who coexisted with the Muslims there, they adapted it, and then it was translated into Hebrew by nature, because the Jews knew about it, and then it was translated from Arabic to Castilian, was under the name Kalila e Dinya. Now the question is, it has now spread over different religions. It went from India, it went to Iran, where there were Parsis in the 5th century, 6th century. Iran was still Zoroastrian. Then it went to Arabia. Then it went to Europe, where it became Christian. So what prompted this translation? There should be normally an opposition to it, because it's from a different religion and culture. But no, because it was the fact that the universality of how the stories were told. They were told in a teaching manner. This helped the spread. And also the morals are universal. In any religion, the source of the moral or the interpretation of the moral might be slightly different, but the moral itself is universal. So people found it attractive, irrespective of which culture they looked at it from. So that's why it became popular. So I'll give you a few more slides about how it spread. Then we'll see some pictures. Okay, the Arabic was again back translated into Persian, and then it went to Spanish, into Hebrew by Rabbi Yoel. The Hebrew was translated to Latin by John of Capua. He called it the Guide of Human Life or Proverbs of Ancient Sages. These were all in the Greek version is now in the Library of New York, and it was produced in Italy between anywhere in the 11th century, somewhere in the early 11th century. They were all illustrated. So that was one advantage. As it spread over cultures, the artists started adding their own illustration to it. In India, people were already illustrating, but they were not illustrating in paper. They were illustrating by means of sculptures. You see any temple like the Beligave temple or Patadakal temple or even the Nagarjunakonda temple. Now it's a museum because it's underwater, the Nagarjunakonda ruins. All of them, they had sculptures which depicted the Panchatantra or the Jataka tales, which are pretty similar. I think they have a very similar origin, but in India, the illustrations was not on paper, not on ink. It was by sculptures, and the advantage was that the sculptures they remained preserved and over centuries, where many paperworks have been lost, while quite a few have been found because there are a large number of translations of these works. So you will find eventually somewhere some paper form, but so in India, the illustration was always by sculpture. So the first Latin translation was based on the Castilian. So it went from the Arabic world, it went to the Islamic Caliphate of Andalusia, the Umayyad and the Abbasid Caliphate, and then from there it went to the Christians of Spain, and from there it was translated into Latin. It was commissioned on the behalf of Queen of France. And the point is, the author of this work, he changes the character to suit his beliefs, because some of the works of the book didn't suit his idea. So he says, he gives the dedication to the prince, the most Christian devout man of greater interior serenity, column of the Holy Church and defender of the Christian faith of his Lord. To Lord Philip, blessed be he, fortified by the divine providence of God, to the kingdom of France, to the illustrious king. So you see, they take the main core, the morals, and then they subtly change it to fit their needs, to fit the political and the social events of the time, so that it doesn't become ostracized. So that's the freedom that a translator has. So Martin Luther, he wrote his collection of fables based on Panchatantra in about 1530. He used, again, as I told in the beginning, he used it as a tool for his religious ideas. So he was complaining that the society was becoming corrupt, they were moving away from the word of God. So these were written to reflect the state of the society at the time. And he gives, in the Panchatantra, you have the story, and then you have the moral which is told at the end of the story. He does the opposite. He gives the sin that somebody commits, and then he proceeds to explain it with the story. And for him, it was a propaganda tool. He was using it for rhetorical purpose. because he was disillusioned by the corruption in the church at the time. He was complaining that the society is degrading morally, like everybody complains that the things were better before, even today. 50 years ago, things were beautiful. It's the same thing. It has been repeated over the centuries. And for him, it was a reflection on the disillusionment of the society that he had with the society and the corruption that he saw was pervasive in the church as well as the societies, and he was using it as a moralizing tool. The first Italian translation of the Panchatantra was made by Angelo Firenzuola, and Agnolo Firenzuola, and which he says the Discorsi degli Animali. It's the discourse with animals. The most famous Italian translation was by Anton Francesco Doni, and it's called La Moral Filosofia del Doni, from which the English translation came into life by a man called, I think, North, and John North, and he translated into English called the Moral Philosophies of Doni. That the main difference that we had with the other prevailing translation was that except for Luther's, but again Luther was thinking about sins. Here they were not thinking about sins. Here they give the moral philosophy in the beginning, and then they proceed to explain and illustrate it with stories. One of the most famous adaptation was the Fable de La Fontaine by Jean La Fontaine, and he says, "I'll be by gratitude that I owe the greater part to the Pilpay." Now Bidpai became Pilpay. Vidyapati became Bidpai. Bidpai became Pilpay. The wise Indian. He says that I use animals to instruct men. Je me sers des animaux pour instruire les hommes. The funny thing is, when they translated all this, Bourgeois, who was a Zoroastrian, he became Christian in all their translation, and he became a monk who was praying to Christ, and he envisions Christ, the angels, the Virgin, and the Child, and somewhere over translation, many things get lost, saying that the Arabic works became so translated into Christian ideas, so that they don't even realize that their source was Arabic from a different culture. So at the end of the day, they keep forgetting, they forget that it came from a different culture, and they just think that it has been handed down to them over generations, and they continue to proceed. And what was the need for such fables, and how were they used? As I told you before, the fables were used to teach morals, but in Europe, it was used as a pedagogical tool. It was taught to kids. It was also taught to adults. So it was to increase during the Renaissance as the moral culture in grammar schools. They were providing examples for sermons by priests and pastors. And also it was a tool for where people could talk to each other, people could converse about it, and it also how people could talk about the moral philosophy in it. Like when we were kids, we all these stories in Doordarshan, where they were telling about maybe Vikram or Vetal or Panchatantra. Then next day, if you are living in a village, everybody will be talking in the tea shop about how the stories went and what was the implication of the stories and so on. It was a point of conversation, a point of social gathering. And so imagine a priest or in the church giving a sermon, they will listen and then they will talk about it, and then they will form own ideas about it. It just became, it took a life of its own, and it just kept propagating everywhere. So also the illustrations, as the times changed, the morals also, even though the morals were universal, the subtle changes were introduced to the morals. So the illustrations also began to change. So that was in Europe. Now let us go to how Panchatantra spread in the East. Panchatantra migrated to Tibet, China, Mongolia, and all the Southeast Asian countries. Spread to Tibet and China and Mongolia was fairly simple because the Tibetans had connections with they were Buddhists and they had Buddhist connections. So they came to India. A lot of them studied in Nalanda. A lot of them studied in India. So they took with them the stories and various recensions, because Panchatantra is not one group of fables. We had a version in Kashmir, we had a version in Gujarat, we had a version in South. So wherever the monks studied, they took with them their recensions and then they translated to local languages. For spread in Indonesia and Indochina, it was mainly due to the mixing of the traders from south of India, the Tamil traders, with Indonesia and Indochina, and then it was translated into old Javanese language called Tantri Kamantaka, and it had about 360 stories. It also went to Laos, called Nang Tantai or Nandaka Prakarana, and it was composed in the 16th century. And also it was composed in as Nang Tantra in Thai language. It was composed in. There was an oral tradition much earlier, because if it had gone to Indonesia, there would always be obviously most likely been a Thai version of it. But the first published books came out in the 19th century based on manuscripts from the 18th century. So this is this is from 1888. This is how the graph of the spread of Panchatantra looked like at that time. Afterwards, you had so many more translation. It's a bit hard to see, but the point is, you see, it already seems to be a large tree there from one small seed of Sanskrit. It's like a banyan tree which has grown and it has gotten many secondary shoots and roots which grow down to the earth, and it just seems like a tree. And the whole world is sitting under the tree and learning morals even to this day. In Germany, you have this famous group of stories called the Grimm's Tale, the fairy tale of Grimm's. The Grimm's Tale, most of it were taken from the Panchatantra, because the Grimm's brothers were linguists in Sanskrit. So they were the ones who first proposed the idea of how Sanskrit and German were related and what are the rules to convert Sanskrit to old German and so on. So they also knew Sanskrit, and they also took their fables from Sanskrit and translated. Then you have Cinderella. See, every author, when they translated the fable, they also added their own spin to it, and they formed a different story where they embedded these stories and made sub stories and so on. So you have Cinderella, the Snow White, and everything. There are you have the frog and the princess and things like that. They were all over the huge collection of fables, but everything had an element of the Panchatantra embedded in them. So that was the license they had. So let's see some images, because enough of boring text. Let's have some fun. How many of you have been to Mahabalipuram? Okay. This is called the Descent of the Ganges. It's a beautiful rock cut sculpture, sheer face. There you see the Bhagirath wanting to bring Ganges down to the earth. He is doing a tapasya on one leg. The sculptor below, he was also a kind of a fun-loving prankster. He, in the same image to the lower left, he puts this image of a cat doing a similar tapasya. Near the cat, there are two mice which are praying to him. You know what happens in the story? The mice keep praying to the cat, and cat eats them eventually. So it was a moral tool to tell people that don't follow fake sadhus. This is called the hypocritical cat. This idea doesn't exactly appear in the Panchatantra. In the Panchatantra, it's more hare and a bird. They have a quarrel about where they live. because the hare lives in the same, he lives in a hole in the same tree as the bird, and the bird lives above, and they get into quarrel because of the noise and everything. So they say, how do we solve this? So the hare suggests, let's go and meet the cat who lives on the banks of the river, and he's a great sadhu, and he always he is devoted to penance, and he shows compassion to all living beings. So they go and meet the cat, and the cat is doing penance with his hands outstretched to the sun and doing japa dhyana and all those stuff. These guys give him they tell him the complaint, and the cat opens his eyes and he listens to them and then simply eats them both. This story is also the same in the Arabic translation. You see, there is this cat who is eating both the hare and the bird. Similar story, now it changes when it goes to Europe. The cat instead becomes a wolf, and the wolf has to mediate between a chicken and a goose. You know, the funny thing about Panchatantra is also that the characters are not gullible, they are not stupid. So when the hare suggests, the hare is called Dirghakarana because it has long ears, he is called Dirghakarana. And the hare suggests to the bird that let's go and meet the cat, and the bird says, I don't believe you, because the cat will eat us naturally, because it's his duty, it's his thought that we have to eat birds. So I'm not going to. But then the hare manages to convince the bird, saying that, oh, he's a great hermit, you come and see for yourself. And then the bird agrees. And the cat is funnily called Dadikarana, like the ear of a yogurt. But the bird, when he is skeptical of the cat, he says that if you see somebody with a hermit's disguise or a disguise of a sadhu, don't trust him, because there are so many people at holy sites who hide their true intentions, and in the end they cheat you. So the moral was told, but it also tells that the characters were not gullible, because over translation, the intelligence of the characters also tend to get a bit lost. The characters just blindly believe what the guy says and they go. No, the characters question, because the Indian tradition was always be skeptical of everything. So they question whether the guy is legitimate sadhu or not. And in the end, he goes and sees with his own eyes that the cat is doing a yogic posture, and then he believes. But that's how it is. This one, can somebody tell what this story is? Yeah. Yes. So the story of the geese and the turtle was that there was a pond where there were the swans and there was a turtle. The swans and the turtle were great friends. But apparently the turtle used to talk a lot. So he liked to talk to everybody. So once one day the pond started drying up. It slowly started to dry. So the geese were planning to leave the pond and go to another place. Then they saw his friend, their friend the turtle, and they told him that the turtle said, please also help me, because I will die here without water. So the geese agreed, and on one condition, that you have to keep your mouth shut while we take you. So they devised a plan with a stick, and the turtle was supposed to catch hold of the stick with his mouth, and then they will fly. So they started flying, and there were a group of people down in the ground, and they saw this weird scene, and they started shouting. And the turtle became curious, and he wanted to explain to them, and he opened his mouth and he fell down and he died. So the moral is, he who does not respect the words of well-wishing friends will die like the tortoise which lost his grip on a stick. This is in Paris. This is in the museum in Paris. This is the first, one of the first Latin translation, which is called Liber Regius. And you see the same Same idea. And this, the one on the right is from Germany. Das Buch der Beispiele der alten Weisen. It means the book with the examples of the old old sages. Okay. It's the same idea. And okay, the idea how the tortoise falls down and how he dies, it changes from culture to culture. In some culture, he falls down, but he's unharmed, or the people kill him. In some culture, he falls down and he breaks his shell and he dies, and so on. But the idea remains the same. What is this? What's the story? Yeah. Somebody, what's the story? Yeah, but that's the simplest story. But why, how does it happen? Huh? Yeah. I want to eat your heart. I want to eat the monkey's heart. The tree, exactly. The monkey says, I put the heart in the tree, and he escapes. So this is from the Beligave temple, monkey and the crocodile. You can see the monkey sitting on the crocodile, and the crocodile is taking him to the house because the crocodile ostensibly has invited the monkey for a dinner, only to be eaten, only to eat him himself and his wife. Then the monkey realizes this, and he says, oh, I left, all the monkeys leave their hearts when they leave their home. So he goes home and climbs the tree. So this is from Indonesia, the picture on your left. It's from the Candi Mendut temple, which is a Buddhist temple complex, and it's in Indonesia, and you see the monkey still riding a crocodile. The other one, you see in Arabic, the crocodile became a tortoise. Don't ask me how a tortoise can eat a monkey's heart. Makes no sense, but it got translated into a tortoise trying to eat the monkey's heart, where the monkey sees the tortoise and he drops a jamun into the water, and that's how they become friends. So the monkey drops some jamun to the water, and the tortoise eat it, and they become turtle eats it, and they become friends. And then the turtle's wife wants to eat the monkey's heart, and then they go. So the moral is, one who's intelligent doesn't become dull when you are under distress, will get rid of problems like the tortoise like the monkey who escaped the sea. What is this story? Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. So it was not acting as a sadhu, because a lot of fishes and a crane lived in a pond, and the pond started drying up. There was a heron who was there, and he said, oh, I will help you by transporting it to different pond by taking you with my beak. So the fishes believed him, and as soon as he took them, he went to a hilltop and he ate all the fishes. Then it came the turn of the crab, and the crab, he was being carried, and he saw piles of fish skeleton below. He realized that the heron was eating it, so he just choked the heron to death. So this is from Vishwa Brahma temple in Alampur, and you see how the same motif carries over to Arabia. And this one, so if any of you get the chance to go to Italy in your future, please visit Palazzo Gondi. It's in Florence. There you will have a piece of every it's in a staircase. Every staircase has a different story. And this, you see the crab grabbing hold of the heron's throat. Palazzogondi doesn't only have tales from Panchatantra, it also has Aesop's Fables. It has a staircase and it's very beautiful. But people easily miss it because they are very, very small. These pieces are very, very small, but just pay attention. So the moral of the story was not to believe in false friends. This is called the man in a well. It is not in Panchatantra, but it's in Mahabharata. So do you know anybody what this story is? A man in a well. No. No. Yeah, but this is not that story. This story, it's not a story, it's a moral. You can see it's written in, you see how it's written in Sanskrit also. Astiva vichayati gartamiva patati. That once there was a man, he was walking in the forest and suddenly elephants, male elephants started chasing him, a group of elephants. Okay? He started running for his life. He accidentally fell into a well on the ground because he didn't see it. To save him, there was a branch of banyan tree hanging, okay? Or you can say plant with which was growing into the well. So he caught hold of the plant and he was hanging by that. Okay? At the time, two mice started gnawing at the branches. Okay? Below him was a bunch of snakes. Okay, so he saw in all this danger. At the time on the tree, there was a honey comb and a few drops of honey started dripping. The man, in spite of all this danger, he was still interested to taste the honey. So he was trying to reach the honey and lick it with his tongue, which was dropping. So it's a philosophy from Mahabharata, Jaina literature also, which says, in spite of all the dangers and all the problems that man has, he still tries to reach that small point of pleasure, even when he's about to die. It's been translated into numerous Indian languages, this philosophy. But the funny thing is, it also went worldwide. You see, this is in the Nagarjunakonda temple. You see, the man is hanging. You see, the man is hanging there. There is a bunch of snakes with their mouth open. There are elephants here, and there is a rat gnawing at the root. Don't ask me why. In Arabic, the elephants became camels. Still, the rats are gnawing, and there is a bunch of snakes below. In Arabic version, the snakes don't reside. The well is doesn't have a bottom. It is a bottomless well which leads into hell. So the philosophy which was translated was this. They were so it's the tree and the desert figure. They denote the night of ignorance. The man in Arabic, for the Arabs, it figures the heretics who are non-believers who don't worship. The elephant figures the impermanence of things. The wells figure the brink of life and death. The well denotes the brink of between life and death. The roots of the tree denotes the human existence. The two rats, which are white and black, one of them are white and black, or they denote the day and night. How day and night is gnawing at your life every day and taking away a portion of your life. The idea is very similar to what is exposed by Thiruvalluvar in Tamil, where he says a day is like a saw which cuts away your life. So don't be happy that you have a day. Be neutral. Don't be sad. Don't be positive, but don't be if something good happens to you. In a way, he says, don't celebrate birthdays because it's one day closer to your death. Exactly. So the roots of the tree of the animals are the roots of the tree is the root of your life, and when they are cutting away the root, the rats are cutting away the root. It means that you are staring at the oblivion, which is the bottom of the well, And the honey figures the man's desires when he reaches the old age, because he's closer to the death, yet he's still longing for something which is pleasurable. He's trying to drink the honey. And the crocodiles or the dragons or whatever you have, or the snakes, that denote death. So the same idea in the moral philosophy of Dhoni, where now one of the rats has been replaced by a goat, and the elephants have been replaced by lions. And in German, the elephants became replaced by wolves. Same idea. Poor guys, in the German version, they don't even have a honeycomb. So they are just bleakly hanging there, waiting for their death. There is no honeycomb, no honey. So this comes to my conclusion. Panchatantra is an extraordinary example of how literature has been translated and transmitted all over the world. The good thing, the one thing which is unique about Panchatantra is that they didn't transmit only the oral representations or the literary or the written form. They were also transmitted pictorially. So the pictorial representation helped people to understand the morals while keeping the crux of the story the same. They underwent a lot of changes, but the main morals remained the same. Obviously, as I showed you, there are some elements which are lost in the illustration, like the missing honeycomb or the lions being replaced by, or the elephants being replaced by camels, but just it could be due to the misunderstanding between different cultures. But the Panchatantra, in spite of all these changes, it remains one of, even to this day, one of the most widely spread literature in the world. I mean, you can even take Bible or any religious text, the Gita, Bible, they transcended boundaries, but they were not as widely read by people, common people who had different religion, culture, as the Panchatantra, because the Panchatantra formed the moral fabric of the world over 1,000 years, and it's still continuing to this day. Thank you.
Sometime in other fields, like for example, medicine and astronomy, India contributed to the Arab world, and then some of those came back to India in a slightly modified or further developed way, and were re-assimilated or readapted. So we do have in some other fields.
Yeah, sure. Probably there also exists here such things, but nobody has done a critical study on that. So as long as we sit and study and compare, it's not going to be easy to find out, because stories, the problem with other fields is they are not subjective fields, they are objective fields, like astronomy and mathematics. You can say which came back and stuff. Stories, because they have so many regional flavors, and you don't even know whether they came back from outside India or they were influenced by the neighboring state. So it's very, very hard to figure out, and it becomes a big question in itself.
Hello, sir. I had a question about another story, like the great flood stories. Like there is one in Mesopotamia, there is one in like Bible, there is one in our Puranas.
Yes.
And we are told that Mesopotamian one is the oldest one. So can we say that ours was influenced by them?
That's more of a question to Michel G, because it's more to do with archaeology. The point is, yesterday we had the same idea from Massimo.
In fact, yes, Professor Massimo Vidale, who was with us till today, tomorrow, showed some, some figurines and portrayals of what seems to be like a great flood in Central Asia, predating even the Mesopotamian period. So if so, it's very hard to say where it really originates. I have seen comparisons during the 19th century. It was very common to say that Indians borrowed the flood from Mesopotamia. It's very difficult to prove these things, but because it is true that in the Vedas, you don't have the flood proper.
Yeah.
You have things which can be regarded as floods, but they are not, not all over the world. There is a Greek scholar, his name is Nicholas Kazanov, who has compared very rigorously the Mesopotamian and the Indian floods, and his conclusion is that the Indian version is older. But will be ultimately debatable. What is certain, however, very certain, is that the biblical flood, because we know that in the Bible, in Genesis, it's the same. God is displeased with humanity and sends a flood, and then you have the ark of Noah and so on. That is certainly borrowed from the Mesopotamian period. So at least we have one bit of the transmission, which is clear. For the rest, more research.
So about this flood, I am familiar with the story that comes from my state, the state I come from. There is a saying, I don't know the origin of the story, but we have heard that our ancestors used to say that there will come a time when the flood waters, so the waters will reach the steps of Jagannath temple. And that is when I don't know what will happen, but that kind of story is also.
So it's like you have your own covered. There is one more.
There are many regional
variations.
Traditions in India, for example, in the old Tamil epic, Puhar, at the end of the epic, Puhar actually.
Yeah, Puhar, it goes underwater.
Is swallowed by the sea because people have forgotten to rituals to Indra and so on. So and actually these may also reflect past events, distant memories of past events where parts of the coast were actually swallowed by the sea because after the ice age, all over the world the sea level rose, and definitely there were large areas of coastal lands which were submerged. There's no doubt about that.